Yeah, Paul and I worked together at ESPN for many years. We did commentary together. We did shows together, and what a character.
Yeah, very much. As well as being a great player, I think that's probably one of the things people remember about him. He was such a big personality as well as a big player, wasn't he?
He never changed at all, Phil. From listening to all the stories for the book, from all his teammates and his friends and everybody like that, to the way he was after that. He had a bit of a nomadic existence between the UK, US, Japan, and whatever. But he finally found happiness sadly towards the end of his life. But he never changed at all. He was that mouthy, loud, very lovable character that his teammates knew, supporters knew of Plymouth, Chorley, Ipswich, England, Arsenal, Portsmouth, all of those clubs. And he never changed, which is very different to Stevie Nicol, because Stevie and Paul worked together at New England Revolution as coach and assistant coach, and they both ended up at ESPN. Paul was his usual jovial, effervescent self. Didn't have to change to do TV because that's the way that he was. Stevie did have to change because Stevie was someone who, in the perfect way that a football manager should be, told the media a lot without telling them anything at all. And it didn't quite translate well into television. And it wasn't until a producer of Stevie's, of ESPN FC, kind of said to him, look, you're going to need to kind of at least give some sort of opinion here near the start. And Stevie did. And Stevie went on to be and still is a very valued member of the ESPN FC team. But he had to change to do that. Paul didn't, because that was Paul. And I love that about him.
I mean, I've interviewed him a few times, and you just have to kind of just set him running, don't you, with the stories of the good old days with Town in particular.
It reminds me of a story. I was covering the Open Championship at Lytham a few years ago. We had Gary Player on the show, and I think I'd said to him, "Hi, Gary," and 20 minutes later, I got another word in. He picked up and ran with it, and that's what Paul was like as well. And so many different stories in the book. I think the culmination of them all are the perfect kind of way to sum Paul up. But for instance, the first person, and I spoke to about 40 people for the book. The first person I spoke to was Kevin Painter, former World Darts finalist, massive Ipswich fan, who used to do shows, go around. Couldn't do it on TV with PDC because they has rules and regs in place, but he used to do kind of touring shows at local clubs, and he would wear a Paul Mariner darts shirt. And the last person I spoke to was Jurgen Klinsmann, because Paul was the man who Jurgen hired when he was at Toronto FC as head coach. Sadly, it didn't last long, but to go from Kevin Painter, a darts player, to Jurgen Klinsmann, and have a forward by Ian Gillan of Deep Purple, there's a few genres in there, and that kind of sums Paul up. It wasn't just about football.
Yes, very much so. So the idea of the book, when did that come about? Was it sort of after he found out he was ill, or was it something you'd been thinking about before that?
I wrote Stevie Nicol's book as well, and I'd gone to Stevie shortly after he joined ESPN and said, "Do you fancy writing a book?" No, because he was still in that stage of, "I'm not telling you anything about me or my opinions." Then he changed, and he came back to me and said, "Fancy writing a book, big man?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And it was pretty similar with Paul when he first joined ESPN. I said, "Do you fancy writing a book?" Well, we'll see. And that was it. It was just a chat over a couple of beers. And then I think it was March this year, I messaged him one morning. I just have I wake up and kind of, let's write a book type thing, which is weird, but I've done 4 now, including Paul's. That's how the first 3 kind of came about, just on the off chance that they may one day. And this time, Paul it was just on WhatsApp because he was going under chemotherapy and radiotherapy, so his health wasn't good at the time. And I said to him, "Do you fancy writing a book again?" And he said, "What does it entail?" And we've written about this in the book. And I explained to him, he said, "Look, I'm going to have plenty of time because I'm getting all this treatment, but I've got nothing to do because I'm recovering." I had one chat with him, Phil, for 90 minutes. That's the only time I spoke with Paul. And the reason we managed to do a book is mainly in part thanks to a good friend of mine by the name of Brad Feldman, who is the New England Revolution commentator who worked with Paul for many years. while Paul was also at ESPN doing the games. Paul went from the sideline to the commentary booth, and they sat down together in 2010 and kind of started something. It was never really designed to end up as a book or whatever. It was mainly to get things on paper to potentially do something in the future. I didn't know about this when I asked Paul, and it wasn't until 3 or 4 weeks into the project, when it became public that we were doing this, that I got an email from Brad, and he simply said, "Look, I sat down with him, and we've got about 25,000 words transcribed in 2010. Would you like them for free?" That's an unbelievable gesture. So that's given us the depth of character and the content from Paul, plus the additional stuff I got from more than 40 interviews, and speaking to friends and family and Paul for those 90 minutes. So I think I must be one of the rare ghostwriters who has never spent any time in the presence of the person I'm ghostwriting for while we're doing the book, because all the time was spent prior to that. And a lot of that time was, there's a story about Barcelona after he played against Barcelona for Ipswich in the UEFA Cup. Barcelona tried to sign him, and I got that from Paul while we were doing ESPN FC content. So I was able to then ask him about that in the 19 minutes that we spoke over the phone when he was having a good day. So the culmination of everything is in the tome that we've written.
Because you pick up. I worked alongside Kevin Beattie on the radio,
Sure.
and I know stories that that I would, in similar situation, I would have brought in and asked other people about. And so yes, you kind of you hear all the stories when you're working alongside these people, don't you?
You do, and the Ipswich fans, the Plymouth fans, and the supporters of all the clubs that he played for. I went onto their message boards and put things on, saying, "Look, if you've got any memories or whatever, I'd love to hear them." And as a result of the Ipswich and the Plymouth and the Portsmouth and the Arsenal fans getting in touch, saying, "Oh, I remember this happened and that happened as well," and a lot of it was detective work. My father was a detective inspector in the police, and part of that is kind of rubbed off on me as a journalist. I don't take no for an answer. If I think I can get some sort of information or additional information that might be out there, I will. And I ended up chatting to someone called Nigel Adderley, who's a commentator for Talk Sport and Premier League. He'd worked with him at BBC Radio Lancashire when he was there, and Paul was also doing coaching, because as a result of his commentary, he got to know Preston guys pretty well, because he was commentating on them every second week. So they brought him in. David Moyes was there. They brought him in as a strikers coach or a forwards coach to do set plays and everything like that. And he was actually coaching the day that David Beckham signed on loan for Preston. And he had one session with Paul, made his debut as a sub at the weekend. Paul was commentating on Preston. Beckham scored as a sub, I think direct from a corner. It's in the book. And Paul said in commentary, this comes from Nigel Adderley, Paul's taking all the credit, because he's like, "Oh yeah, we worked on that." No, they didn't. But he kind of said that was his jovial manner. "Yeah, if it wasn't for me, Beckham wouldn't have scored," that type thing. And that's just one of thousands of stories in the book.
Yeah, no, it's and I think David Beckham does look back fondly on his time at Preston. I always remember he kind of spoke about somewhere, he was sort of, someone listed the clubs he was at, and he went, "And Preston," it made a point of saying that he played there as well. So which Ipswich legends did you speak to while writing the book then?
Well, I knew George Burley anyway, because I'm a Hearts supporter, and he was our manager. Ill-fated manager, sadly for him, because he was brilliant, and the manager got fired by the owner because the owner was annoyed. He was a crazy Russian. And that was the first book I'd written, which I think is there, and it's about why George Burley was fired. That's the whole story behind the book. And there was a few things, but basically he became more popular than the owner. And as a result of that, the owner, megalomaniac, didn't like that and got rid of him, made up some BS stories. So it was George. And Terry Butcher's another one who I know well, because Terry had a long spell up in Scotland with the Rangers, but became a coach at Dundee United and used to stay near Stirling in a place called Bridge of Allen with his lovely wife, and used to listen to the radio station that I did the sport on, Radio 4th in Edinburgh, and he'd phone up for various quizzes that we were doing in the breakfast show. He was basically the bibs and cones guy at Dundee United. This is the former England captain who was trying to get back into management. So he used to phone us up. So I've known Terry for many years, and ultimately he ended up being the manager of Hibernian, the rivals of Hearts. So that didn't really go down well, but we still had a fair bit of fun. John Wark had some wonderful stories. Russell Osman and the Osman Butcher Manor triumvirate. A lot of it was to do with music, and that's where the whole Deep Purple and the heavier stuff comes in. Although there was a time, and Terry's given us a wonderful story, when they ended up going to a Madness gig, and Mariner was hard rock, heavy stuff, the good, loud kind of rah, rah, rah stuff that I don't know, some people like. And Butcher said, "Let's go to a Madness gig." Mariner's like, "What?" And Butcher's like, "I'm going to all your Deep Purple and AC/DC and Iron Maiden stuff. Come with me to a Madness gig." So Terry was leading a conga down the front during Baggy Trousers, and everyone was following, and there's Warky and Paul Mariner and everything like that. But the good thing is that after the gig, Butcher has bought a T-shirt, and it said F something. The whole story's in there, and without wanting to swear, it was F something. It was a Madness thing. So he wore it on the Saturday. Ipswich were playing away from home somewhere, and he didn't have his tracksuit top all zipped up all the way. So he got on the bus, and Bobby Robson's sitting at the front of the bus, and what the hell is that? Because he just saw the F word at the front, and he told him, "You're not coming with us unless you go back into the change room, get that bloody thing off, and dress properly like you should when you're with Ipswich Town." So there's so many musical and football stories that are intertwined, and a lot of them involve alcohol as well.
Because I think it's Ian Gillan and Iron Maiden that he was particularly close to, wasn't he?
He was.
He played for an Iron Maiden football team, is that right?
He did that. There was that, and Gillan played for Paul's charity team, and Paul played for Gillan's charity team. There's a story about them flying down from his little farm, or his big farm that he had near Ipswich, with George Best to play at Plymouth and all sorts. It's just that back then there was footballers wanted to be rock stars, and rock stars wanted to be footballers. And there's a whole chapter about that with Ian Gillan, whose forward is one of the most emotional things that I've ever read, because let you into a little secret. Ian had written the forward maybe in April, end of April. He's obviously a hugely successful businessman, rock star, musician. So his time is precious. But he'd written that, and I got a phone call from him on a Saturday night. I'm over in Connecticut, 5 hours behind. So it was like, I think it was like 8:50 at night, which is 1:50 UK time in the morning. And Ian had been up writing songs for his new album. And he got back that day having seen Paul, and he knew it was going to be the last time he would ever see Paul, because Paul wasn't in a good way. So he phoned me. He said, I've just sent over the rest of the forward. And I said, "What do you mean the rest?" He goes, "I wanted to add to it. And there's a very poignant ending now to the forward," because Ian knew that was the last time he would ever see one of his best mates. And to write immediately after that, the remainder of the forward it's emotional. I'll leave it there.
I think it was an emotional moment for all Ipswich fans, certainly Ipswich fans of my age and above. I'm of an age that I grew up. I was thinking today when I was going to talk to you that Paul Mariner played in the first game I saw at Portman Road, missed a penalty actually.
Wow.
It's we all kind of, yes, that is the golden era, and I think it was the golden era for him, wasn't it? The golden era of his career. Ipswich was the happiest time of his footballing career, wasn't it?
He chose Ipswich for a couple of reasons, one of which he didn't want to move to London at an early age in his life. And the reason I say that is because the Saturday night after a Plymouth game at the start of season 76-77, Ron Greenwood, who was no longer in charge at West Ham, but was general manager, so he was involved in kind of signings and everything. He had agreed a deal. They'd shaken hands with Paul, with the with the Plymouth chairman and manager. They'd agreed a deal for Paul to go to West Ham. Final decision would have been kind of up to him. I suppose if you're told back then, it's not like it is now where the player has all the power. But when Ron Greenwood left Home Park on that Saturday evening, Paul Mariner was pretty much a West Ham United player, apart from signing the contract. And it wasn't until Bobby Robson, who had been, I think it was the week before, Ipswich were playing down in Bristol. And Bobby, after that game, then him and his assistant drove down to Plymouth from Bristol while the rest of the Ipswich players went back to East Anglia. And they went for dinner with Paul at a hotel in Plymouth because his interest was clear. And that was a kind of, look, this is who I am. We want to know who you are. Paul agreed to that. So there was always this interest from Ipswich. And Bobby had said to the manager at the time, the Plymouth manager at the time, no matter what happens, if there's any bids or whatever, keep me in touch because I want to sign this player. He's going to be the next thing, I think. And bear in mind that Plymouth was on a lower league side at the time, so it was a bit of a gamble. They'd reached a League Cup semi-final against Manchester City, and Paul had played well, but he was untested at that level. And then it was on the Sunday when Bobby Robson phoned the Plymouth manager and said, what's going on? I've been hearing that he's off to West Ham. And a deal was done on the Sunday between Bobby Robson and the Plymouth manager, then the Plymouth chairman, because they offered more money plus a couple of players going the other way. And it was the Tuesday that they all went up on the train. And at that stage, West Brom still thought they had a chance of signing him. And he met with West Brom in London. This is all dictated in the book and the quotes and everything from them. But the reason he met West Brom was Johnny Giles, was because Johnny was one of his heroes growing up along with Jimmy Greaves. And he just thought, out of courtesy, I want to kind of say, look, I've already made my decision, but I still want to meet you. And as it happens, football has a funny way of providing a quirk of fate. Paul's home debut was against West Brom, and Johnny Giles said to him before the game something along the lines of, you'll regret that decision, son. Paul says, I'll speak again at full time. There's a reason, Phil, why they didn't speak at full time, and it's all in the book, and it's because Paul and Bobby had agreed pre-game. First of all, Bobby didn't want Paul playing the full 90 minutes because he made his debut at Old Trafford, and then he played against West Brom, scored that wonderful goal. But Bobby felt with everything that had gone on with the move, and he was still a pretty young lad, he thought, I'll probably play you for 65, 70 minutes if that's okay. Now, Paul wanted to play 90 minutes in pretty much every game, and Paul's like, thank you so much, Gaffer. He goes, why? He goes, well, I was really hoping to get a train back to Plymouth tonight to see my family and to get all my belongings together. So Bobby Robson, prior to the game against West Brom, went to get the train timetables so that Paul could get the 5 o'clock train from Ipswich via Liverpool Street in London back to Plymouth. And that is the reason why Paul didn't play the full 90 minutes that day on his home debut against West Brom. And is it Mal Henderson or one of the Ipswich historians, who was Bobby Robson's press guy, actually drove Paul to the station at full time after he'd showered and changed. So football's changed a bit, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. It might even have been 8-0 if he'd played the full 90 minutes, mightn't it? You never know. I mean, that's another thing. It's partnerships. Does he talk about the partnerships that he formed? Obviously, at Ipswich, Trevor Wymark was the first one, and then Alan Brazil and Eric Gates in this kind of what was a revolutionary system that I think actually was Bob Ferguson's idea rather than Bob Robson's, that they fielded during that era that won the UEFA Cup in '81.
I thought that was important. There's a lot about Ipswich in the book, understandably so, both behind the scenes and on the pitch. But I thought it was important to have this kind of this narrative going through the book of the striking partners that Paul had, from Kevin Wainwright at Chorley to Billy at Plymouth, to the guys that he had at Ipswich, which started off with Trevor and ended up with kind of Alan Brazil and Eric Gates and a couple others as well. And then at Arsenal, Charlie Nicholas and Tony Woodcock. I think he was ahead of his time, Paul, and I think the managers that played with him kind of knew that, because he never played he played 4-4-2, but he'd play with one up, one off. He was the kind of runner. And it all started at Chorley when he was a midfielder. He'd actually given up football to play cricket with Bill Beaumont, the former England rugby captain. And it wasn't until Steve Walsh, who was the director of football at Leicester when they won the league and then went to Everton, who was one of his good pals, used to play against him at school. bumped into him one night when they were underage drinking and said, what happened to you? He goes, oh, I went away, I played cricket. But Bill Bowman had gone to start playing rugby by this stage, and it was just Matters on his own playing cricket. It wasn't as much fun. So Steve had said to him one night, look, do you fancy coming back? And there was a team, a feeder team for Chorley. And Mariner ended up playing for them, went up to Chorley. The manager who'd been there was at South Liverpool, a guy called Alan Hampson. And Alan had signed a striker specifically to play with Paul. But Paul at this stage was a midfielder, and he'd scored as a midfielder against South Liverpool before Alan Hampson had joined Chorley. And he just saw something, the manager, that made him think, you know what, Paul Mariner's not a box-to-box midfielder. He's got a chance of being a not so much a 10, but an out-and-out striker, or someone that a striker can play alongside. So he was the one that pushed him forward. And I think with that education that Paul had in the early stages, he then knew what Eric Gates, what Trevor Wymark, what Alan Brazil, what all these other strike partners that he played with, he then knew that it wasn't just a two up top, where at times it was. He knew how to play that position. And I think he made his strike partners better.
And actually, you think about how the modern game has developed, as you were sort of saying at the beginning, really, he would probably be a player who would cope with being a number 9 now.
Yeah. And one thing I did deliberately when I spoke to all the people that I spoke to, and we've got commentators like Martin Tyler, and not, it wasn't just teammates, it was people who'd covered Paul, or who'd seen Paul play or played against Paul. And the one kind of common thread that I used, I didn't say anything. I said, which current player would you say Paul would be most like? And I didn't say any more. And so many of them came back and said Harry Kane. Because Harry Kane's now dropping a little bit deeper, but you saw in the 2 England games how he's still one of the world's best strikers. And Terry Butcher said he thought he was better than Harry Kane the way that he was. I mean, that's can be hyperbole. It can be your pal talking up his pal or whatever. But I think that kind of sums up Paul and the type of player that he was. I don't know what will happen with Harry Kane as his career goes on. I doubt he'll end up as a centre back, because that's what Paul did at Portsmouth, having played once or twice there for Arsenal after David O'Leary got injured. And he said it gave him more of an idea that he never wanted to play as a central defender ever again, and how tough a position it was. But he played against Colin Clark for Portsmouth against Southampton.
Yeah,
and
Clark was it.
Yeah, his one job was to keep Colin Clark quiet. Clark scored twice, ragdolled Mariner, and it was something that he didn't. But he was able to then learn from that and know what defenders didn't like. Was a lot of the things that Paul did. He might appear like a bit of a daft lad, Matters, but he had a good footballing brain.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell there was an intelligence there, couldn't you, when you spoke to him? I interviewed him a number of times, and he was not he was not a typical footballer, as the cliche would go. And yeah, so what are your kind of personal memories of him then? Your kind of when you think of him, what do you personally sort of recollect?
2015 in the office. Come on, does somebody want this other ticket? And I was like, what are you shouting about? Because you could always hear him before you saw him in the office. I said, what is it? He goes, I'm trying to get rid of this other deep purple ticket. No one wants it. I said, when is it? He goes, it's a couple of days' time. I said, look, I'll take it. My father-in-law is a big deep purple fan. I knew Smoke on the Water, and so I quickly made sure I knew more songs. Whatever. I said, I'm fine with that. He says, so what's the deal? He says, right, meet me down there at 4 o'clock. It was in the casino at Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. I said, what time's the gig? He said, 7:30. I said, why are we meeting at 4? He goes, just meet me at 4. And it was on one of the days that he wasn't working. Now, Paul used to coach up at Harvard. He was an assistant coach there for a short time before he went to the New England Revolution. So he still had a house, and that was where he stayed, in Cambridge in Massachusetts. So he used to drive down a couple of hours every time he was on ESPN. So it's about an hour's drive from Cambridge and near Boston down to Foxwoods or so. So he goes, I'm just going to come from the house. I'll meet you there back at 4 or whatever. I said, okay, fine. Met there. So we went for dinner. It was very nice. It was a bit early, but we went. And then it was about 5:30, and he's like, right, let's go. I said, where are we going? Going to the gig. I said, it doesn't start till 7:30. He goes, no, come with me. was like, "Oh." Now at this stage, I knew he loved his music or whatever. I didn't really know about what happened next. So it was a knock on the door. He's got this Access All Area bands he's giving to me and whatever. I'm like, oh, this is a bit posh. So he knocks on the door, and then there's only one person in the room. It's Ian Gillan. He answers it, and it's like long lost brothers, best pals, the tightest hug you've ever seen. Because they hadn't seen each other for so many years, because Paul's over here and their calendars never really kind of matched up together. I felt like a spare part. And he quit the hug, and who's this? And Paul explained it's Mark and whatever. It was just the three of us. And at no stage during the next hour, bear in mind he's got a gig to prepare for, all these band members are elsewhere. At no stage did I feel like a spare part. I felt like part of that, which is a complete testimony to both Paul and to Ian. And they were very, and this isn't a personal story in that I was invited backstage. The reason for the story is because he made me feel like I was somebody, because he paid an interest in what I did, how I was with Paul. I was asking about my family. I'd never met this guy before, Ian Gillan. I'd heard all about him, of course. And then we got onto my father-in-law, the big Deep Purple fan, and he mentioned that. So I told him all the albums that he had, and I'd said to him that he wasn't well. Sadly, he was in hospital at the time with cancer, and thankfully he's made a full recovery. So he said, "Give me your phone." I said, "What is it?" So he said, "Matters, take this." Handed the phone to Manor, and then Manor's like, "How do I use this thing?" So I said, "What do you want to do?" He goes, "Put it on video." So I put it on video for him. And he said, "Hi, this is Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. Hi, Ronnie. I know you're a big Deep Purple fan. I just want to wish you all the best. I know you're having one or two health issues right now, but all the boys are behind you, and we know you can do this." And he didn't have to do that. And I sent it to my father-in-law, and it was one of the best things that he'd received. And that was Ian Gillan. And Mariner's part of it, he's at the end of it as well. He's turning the phone round and going, "Yeah, Ronnie, hey, it's Paul Mariner here." that kind of stuff. And that just summed them up. So humble for all their achievements. Those two, Ian Gillan and Paul Mariner, never thought about themselves first. It was always other people. And that there's a lesson there for whoever thinks they're too big for their boots. No matter what you've achieved in life or in sport or wherever, being humble is certainly something that's very much appreciated by others.